The air of Rome in that summer of shadows was thick with a stench that no incense could conceal. It was not merely the reek of the Tiber or the alleys where refuse gathered. It was the scent of something older, festering in the vaults beneath. St. John Lateran. Whispers moved through cloisters and taverns alike. The dead would not rest. By torchlight, the procession of monks moved like black moths down the marble steps. Their chants were low, not sung in worship, but muttered like spells, as though each syllable was meant to hold back what should not be done. They had been ordered, and orders weighed heavier than prayers. Behind them came armed guards in iron helms, their halberds gleaming faintly as the firelight trembled along their edges. At the heart of this grim retinue walked Cardinal Giovanni, his face pale and sharp like a candle burning too low. His lips were pressed so thinly together that they seemed a wound, and his eyes never left the darkness ahead. The soldiers feared him more than the grave they approached. It was by his command that the stone was to be lifted, by his hand that the silence of the tomb would be broken. They reached the crypt. Torches hissed as they struck damp air, their flames bending back from the stone archways. Moss clung like bruises to the walls. Before them lay a sarcophagus, its lid carved with the likeness of a man whose name had once made rulers tremble. Pope Formosus. The monks crossed themselves, some averting their eyes, others whispering prayers they scarcely believed would be heard. Giovanni raised his hand. The gesture was slight, yet the guards obeyed with haste, setting their shoulders against the stone lid. It groaned like something alive as it shifted. Dust rose in a cloud, thick and choking. And there he lay. The corpse was more skeleton than man, though the skin clung in leathery tatters. The robes, once white, had faded into a yellowed ruin of threads, but the vestments of the papacy still marked him unmistakably. The ring upon his finger was black with tarnish, and his hands lay folded as though in a final prayer that had never been granted. A monk gagged, another fainted outright. Giovanni's eyes, however, gleamed with something fevered. He had not come merely to disturb bones, he had come to make them speak. "Lift him," the cardinal whispered. The guards hesitated. One braver or more foolish than the rest muttered, "Your Eminence, this is sacrilege." Giovanni's gaze turned upon him, cold as steel dipped in water. "It is justice," he said, "and it is the will of the Holy See. Would you stand against the will of God?" The guard said no more. Rough hands reached into the coffin, and with a noise like wet parchment tearing, the corpse of Formosus was raised from its resting place. It sagged between them, its jaw slack, as if the grave itself were reluctant to release him. They carried him upward, through corridors lined with statues of saints, through cloisters where monks pressed themselves against walls in horror. The grotesque parade made its way to the basilica. The bells tolled not for mass, but for judgment. Outside, word spread like a plague wind. The dead pope was to stand trial. The nave of St. John Lateran had been prepared like a court. Candles stood in their thousands, their wax dripping like tears upon the flagstones. A throne had been placed, not for the living, but for the cadaver now dressed in papal vestments of crimson and gold. They set him upon it, his head lolling, his hands folded, the mitre crooked upon his skull. He was bound upright with cords, as though a puppet awaiting the tug of its master. Gasps filled the chamber. Some crossed themselves violently, others spat on the floor in fear. Cardinal Giovanni stood before the court, his voice resonant and terrible. "Formosus," he intoned, "you who presumed to wear the robes of St. Peter, you who defiled the church with your lies and ambition, you shall answer now for your sins." The corpse swayed slightly as though the words themselves unsettled it. A hush deeper than silence fell. "Read the charges," Giovanni commanded. A deacon, trembling, stepped forward with a scroll. His voice cracked as he began. accused, the late Pope Formosus. Charges that he sought the papal throne by unholy means, that he perjured himself, that he desecrated the Holy See by ambition and corruption, that his voice faltered. He looked up at the figure slumped upon the throne. The sockets where eyes once gleamed seemed to stare back at him with a malice that no grave could extinguish. The deacon's lips quivered, but Giovanni's sharp nod forced him to continue. That he betrayed Christ's church by his unworthiness, that his very election was a sin. When the words were finished, the silence was a shroud. Only the drip of candle wax punctured it, as though the church itself wept. Giovanni turned. "Answer, Formosus," he said, his voice like a blade. "Speak your guilt." Of course the corpse did not answer, but in the stillness a sound arose. It was not a voice nor the shuffle of feet, but a long, slow creak, as though the cords binding the cadaver tightened, as though it strained against them. The monks drew back in terror. Some swore the corpse nodded. Others swore its jaw twitched. A murmur spread like fire. "He moves. He answers. God have mercy." Giovanni slammed his hand upon the altar. "Blasphemy," he roared. "Do not see signs where there are none. The dead are silent, but their sins scream. And I, servant of the church, shall give them voice." He turned to the deacon, his eyes gleaming. "Question him." The deacon stammered, Your Eminence, how can I—" "Ask him," Giovanni thundered. The deacon's knees buckled. He turned to the corpse. "Formosus, did you seize the papacy unlawfully? Did you betray the vows you swore?" The silence that followed was worse than any answer. A drop of something, rot or fluid, fell from the corpse's lips onto its robes. The deacon recoiled, crossing himself. Giovanni's smile was thin and cruel. "See how even in death he mocks us with silence. He is guilty, and the heavens themselves bear witness." The hall erupted in shouts, some in agreement, some in horror. The corpse sat motionless, the cords straining as though they held back, something that wished to rise. Then the doors of the basilica slammed open with a crash. A gust of night air swept through, extinguishing half the candles at once. The crowd shrieked as darkness swallowed the chamber. From the shadows, a voice rose, not of man, nor entirely of earth. It was low, hoarse, like wind through a crypt. "You dare!" it whispered. The corpse shuddered. Its head lifted, and all Rome screamed. The basilica reeled in darkness. Smoke from the extinguished candles coiled like serpents, thickening the air with a stench of tallow and rot. The faithful shrieked, their cries echoing off the vaulted stone, a frenzy of terror that rang as though Judgment Day itself had come unbidden. Soldiers tried to hold their lines, but even their halberds trembled as if iron itself recoiled from the unseen. On the throne, the corpse swayed. Its head, bound by cords, jerked with a sudden violence that split the mitre from its crown, sending the holy headdress rolling across the stones like a discarded crown of a king dethroned. The voice that had stirred the darkness spoke again, rasping as though a throat of worms strained to conjure words. "You dare summon me?" The deacon collapsed to his knees, pressing his forehead to the flagstones, his teeth chattering in prayer. Monks clung to one another, their chants dissolving into weeping. The nobles, who had come to witness spectacle under the veil of justice, clawed their way toward the doors, finding them sealed as though by unseen hands. No exit, no escape. Cardinal Giovanni alone stood firm, though his face was pale beneath his cowl, and his lips trembled though they spat defiance. "You mock this court with shadows. The dead cannot speak. It is but trickery, demon's breath." But even as he spoke, the head of Formosus lifted, jerking upward as though unseen strings pulled it. Its jaw cracked, tendons long turned to dust, snapping like brittle cords. The stench of decay poured outward, as lips that were no lips formed the faintest shape of a smile. I was silent in the tomb, it rasped. But you have dragged me here before the living. Shall I not answer? A wave of gasps rippled through the hall, and some fainted outright. A soldier vomited into his helm. The deacon, trembling, clutched the scroll of accusations to his chest, its parchment rattling like bones. Mercy! God have mercy! Giovanni's hand flew upward, commanding silence. You are no pope but a carcass, an empty vessel through which evil speaks. Do you confess your corruption before Christ's throne? The corpse swayed once. More, its sunken sockets seeming to fix upon Giovanni. The sound that came forth was a laugh, a hollow rattle, low and joyless, as though the grave itself chuckled at mankind's folly. Confess? The voice croaked. It is not I who confesses. It is Rome. Rome, which feeds upon her own sons, spitting them out in death. Rome, which feasts on betrayal and dresses carrion in gold. The crowd wailed. Some clawed their faces until blood ran. Others shrieked that judgment had come. Yet Giovanni, burning with both fear and fervor, strode closer to the throne, his robes sweeping like shadow. You blaspheme. You speak not with the tongue of Formosus, but with the devil's hiss. I will not bend before a lie conjured by worms. You were unworthy of Peter's seat in life, and in death you will be condemned. The corpse twitched. A sound, wet and splitting, rose as its hand, bound with rope, jerked outward, fingers curling. The papal ring cracked against the cords, catching the candlelight like an eye. The motion was clumsy, but unmistakable. It pointed at Giovanni. The hall froze. No one breathed. The corpse's voice broke the silence like iron dragged over stone. You sit in the seat of judgment, Giovanni. But who judged you worthy? Who lifted you from dust? Who granted you the chalice when your hands dripped with betrayal? Do you not remember the vows you swore and broke? Giovanni staggered back as though struck. For an instant, his mask of command slipped, and the fear beneath was naked as bone. His mind reeled. How could a corpse know what had been whispered in chambers, hidden in midnight vows, secrets only buried confidants should carry? Lies! Giovanni roared, though his voice cracked. The devil speaks through you! Guards! Bind! Him tighter! Gag that unholy mouth! But no guard moved. Each stood pale, their weapons useless against the weight of dread. To touch the corpse now seemed more perilous than to face fire itself. The monks, huddled in the corners, began to chant, in broken voices, Libera nos, Domine, libera nos! But their prayers faltered as if heaven had closed its ears. Then came a new sound, a creak, not of rope, nor of coffin, but of the stones themselves. The floor beneath the throne shifted, hairline cracks running, outward like veins of shadow. A wind rose, cold and sour, stirring robes and banners. Some swore they saw shapes in the wind, faces twisted in agony, reaching arms. The corpse's head jerked higher, and its jaw gaped wide. You wish for trial, Giovanni? Then let the court be filled. Let the dead rise and speak. The cracks widened, groaning like the bowels of earth. Dust rained from the arches, and from the fissures came a sound that no living ear should hear, the shuffle of limbs long buried, the scratching of nails against stone. A monk screamed. Giovanni, his voice breaking at last, shrieked, Seal it! Seal it now! But the order came too late. From the gaps between the stones, pale fingers clawed upward, nails splintered and black. Then arms, skulls, rib cages, all crawling, dragging themselves into the basilica. The dead of Rome, nameless and forgotten, were answering. The summons of their pope. Their moans filled the air, a chorus of judgment. The crowd scattered, trampling one another, clawing for the sealed doors. Blood smeared across stone as bodies fell. The soldiers broke ranks, their halberds clattering useless to the floor, and At the heart of it all, the corpse of Formosus, bound upon the throne, swayed like a king presiding over his council of the damned. Giovanni fell to his knees, his hands gripping the altar, his face drenched in sweat and terror. He tried to form words, but his lips only mouthed broken fragments of prayer. The corpse leaned forward, ropes groaning. Its voice thundered, no longer a whisper but a storm. "You judged me guilty, Giovanni. Now Rome shall judge you." The basilica shook as if the foundations themselves would crumble. Statues cracked, their saintly faces splitting into grimaces of stone. The crucifix above the altar shuddered, then toppled, crashing upon the marble with a sound like thunder. The dead advanced. Giovanni raised his eyes, the whites glaring like moons, and screamed.